Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and obviously I'm back at my mom's place, so again, I'm sitting on my bed. I'm very sorry if the camera is very shaky, and I'm also sorry if you can hear talking in the background. My mom is currently in home office and she's on a Skype conference, so yeah, and I want to film, so we just deal with it, okay? And anyway, today I have my full March wrap up, and as always since this year, let me start with my stats. This month went a little bit better again as far as reading goes. I read a total of 8 books and all of them were new to me books, so I didn't have any rereads, which is so far I think the first month this year. Of these 8 books, I had 2 books that were adult, so a lot less than in the past months as well. I had 4 YA books and 1 middle grade, and if you can do maths, you notice that that's just 7 books and not 8 books, and that's because the 8th book was nonfiction. I mean, I guess I could say it's an adult book, but I don't know. I don't really put an age range on nonfiction. As for the genres of the other books, I had 4 high fantasy, 2 historical/urban fantasy, and as for the last book, I don't really know in which genre I should put it. I guess it kind of has magical realism elements, but it's not really. Maybe it's like educational literature, but I'll get to it once I talk about it. So yeah, it's just an undefined genre. I read a total of about 3,600 pages, so not so bad as well. And as for ratings, I had 1 2-star, 2 3-star, 3 4-stars, and 2 4.5-star books. So sadly, no 5-star books this month, and that makes an average of 3.63 stars per book. So like, not the best, but also not the worst, I would say. I have already talked about 5 of the books that I read in March in my mid-March wrap-up, so if you want to know more of my thoughts on those books, I will leave the link to that video in the description box down below and also up there in the eye, so you can go and check that out. So as always, I'm going by star rating or like enjoyment of the books. So the first book I want to talk about is Wie Lukas Charles Darwin aus der Klemme half by Michael Zeidler. And I probably would have actually given this 2 stars, but the reason why I would have given it 2 stars is because of my enjoyment, because it's a middle grade book, but it's not one of those middle grade books that you can still enjoy when you're older. So my enjoyment was 2 stars, but I felt like it was unfair to give it 2 stars just because I'm not the right age anymore, so I gave it 3 stars. However, I do think the 3 stars are deserved because there's some issues I had with the book, which I'll get to later on. This is a kind of educational middle grade, if you want, about the history of the science of biology, especially like Darwin and onwards, so human biology, genes, and so on. I don't know what you call it in English. Genealogy? I don't know. I'm like really bad with scientific language in English, if you didn't notice. But yeah, it's about that, and it's about Lukas, who is in school and he's learning about that currently in school, but he's daydreaming a lot, and so he's daydreaming meeting all those scientists from Darwin to Mendel to I don't know whom later on, and those scientists like explain to him what they're working on and what they have discovered so far. And so yeah, it's really interesting. However, I found it very dry, the way it was explained. I got this book over 10 years ago probably, and I got it after I loved Sophie's World, which has a very similar concept but with the history of philosophy or Western philosophy, and it's one of my favorite books. However, where I feel like in Sophie's World all the dry parts of philosophy are kind of very well wrapped in the story, I didn't really feel that was the case in this book. I found the way it was written was for like 10-year-olds, maybe a little bit older to 12-year-olds. However, I found that the way a lot of the stuff was explained, especially later in the 20th century, a lot of discoveries as far as it comes to DNA and so on and chromosomes were explained in a way that was very, very confusing, even for me, who knows all that stuff, who learn about all that stuff already in school, and it was like one scientific word after another, and I can't see a 10-year-old child, or for example my little sister who's that age right now, reading that book and understanding it. And she's a very smart child who, if you sit her down and if you explain something to her, she grasps it very quickly. That's why I only gave it 3 stars, because I found the story kind of dry, and also I just didn't think that the scientific part of this book was all that well done either. Then next I have Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski, which is book 2 in the Witcher series. This is also still a short story collection, but I feel that in this short story collection we already get a bit more of the world, and we get a bit more of the introduction of what the conflict of the series is going to be, which partly I of course already know because I watched the TV show, but still, you're introduced to more characters, you're introduced to Ciri, for example, in this book. But for those of you who don't know, this series follows Geralt of Rivia, who is a witcher, which is someone who has been magically mutated, whose senses have magically been enhanced, and whose reflexes are now faster, so to better be able to kill monsters. And he basically like travels all the realms of the continent, which is the world this is set in, and he is paid money to kill monsters. And I sadly have to say that I did not enjoy this one as much as I did the first one. I found a lot of the short stories quite a bit more boring, even though this book had a lot more short stories that I didn't know yet from the TV show. And even though the short stories that I did know from the TV show in this book differed quite a bit more than the short stories in the first book. Like, the short stories in the first book very much almost were one-on-one the plot from the TV show or Netflix show, and in this one the plot like differed. You could still recognize which stories or which episodes they were supposed to be, but they were still different. And even though that was the case, I found this quite a bit more boring. And also something that I noticed in this book that I didn't quite notice in the first book, and I just don't know if it just wasn't there in the first book or if I was the one who didn't notice it, but I found the way women were described in this book quite often like off-putting and sexist, because it was just so male-gazy, which just made me feel kind of uncomfortable. And I know that that's the case in a lot of fantasy books that were written especially before 2000, especially by men, mostly by men, let's be honest. But I still didn't enjoy that part of the story. So that's my thought on this specific book. However, I am still interested enough to keep on reading the series, and I'm excited to finally get into Blood of Elves, I think is the next book. I mean, I probably won't do it in April, but like in May, because I finally want to get into like the story and get past the short stories. So yeah, that's my thought on this one. And then the last book I want to talk about, I gave 4.5 stars, and I actually had already read it by the time I filmed my mid-March wrap-up, but I forgot talking about it, so here I am, and that is Times of Change by Ian Mortimer. And this is a history non-fiction. I had actually already started it in 2019, but I only finished it now because I listened to it together with my mom, so we just kind of have to find times when we both are mostly on long car rides and then can listen to it together. So that's why it took quite a bit to finish it. And this is a history non-fiction. It centers around Western history, and especially Western history from the 11th century on. And what Ian Mortimer does is he kind of wants to determine in which century of the last millennium most things changed. And the way he does that is he goes century by century, starting with the 11th, of course, and then finishing with the 20th century. And he talks about what changed in each century. And that can be inventions, that can be philosophies, that can be what like societal changes happened, what political changes happened, what were changes especially that didn't just influence that century, but that like changed from the base, basically, society as it was, and influenced later centuries as well. And I just highly enjoyed this book, and I can really recommend it. By the way, I'm really sorry for the noise that's going on. Someone's apparently working at home right now, like doing homework. You know what I mean. But back to the book. I really enjoyed it. The only reason why I only gave it 4.5 stars and not 5 stars is that the last chapter, where he started looking a bit into the future, got a bit too speculative for me, which just was a huge difference from the earlier chapters, in which he went point by point and explained why a specific change was not only important for that specific century, but also for centuries later on. However, even though I do really highly recommend this nonfiction book, I also think that you should probably already have a like basic grasp of European or Western European history when you go into this book, because this book very much builds on the assumption that you know a lot of big things that have gone on from the Middle Ages until now in European history. And it's very interesting because there were a lot of things he talked about. Even though I know a lot about European history, there were a lot of things that I didn't know about and that I was really surprised that he talked about. And then there were other things where I would have thought that obviously he's gonna talk about that as something that's a big change in European history, but he didn't talk about it. And sometimes he explains why he doesn't talk about it, sometimes he just leaves certain characters from history completely out, and you're left wondering, hey, why am I left out? And sometimes he then explains, yeah, you'd think that's the person that I talk about, but no, actually this other person is the one who made many more changes in that direction, but he's someone not a lot of people talk about. And so yeah, I just really enjoyed this book. I really loved it. I really like the angle with which he approached the topic, and I can highly recommend it. And yeah, with that said, that is it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. Tell me in the comments down below what you read in March. Was it a good reading month? Was it a bad reading month? And have you read any of the books that I talked about in this video, and what were your thoughts on them? And with that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay inside as much as you can, and bye!